there's just so much more that goes on, like, than what goes on in the classroom. Like, I definitely don't regret studying. I love, like, everything that I've learned from UniMel has taught me the foundations in calculus and physics that ultimately helped me with programming and building Abby. But the skills that you need, like the software and the tools, like the uni is not up to date with that at all. I think for example, like Abby's chatbot is built on a GPT-3 language framework, which, you know, that now can, so it's like predictive text, and I actually used that in one of my programming exams in lockdown, where you just have to write the title of the function and then it fills out. It predicts what the function is going to be. So in a way, that's like, you know, almost considered cheating, because it's sort of, you know, you didn't really write. Is it like, did you cheat if you only wrote 10% of the paper yourself?
Yeah, there you go.
Know, your code. But, you know, unis don't, like, they're just not up to date. There's just too much of a lag, and they don't teach you the things that especially with tech and robotics and, you know, AI, like the things that have come out in the last 2 years alone. They can't build a course around it because it's just come out like that.
Welcome back to this episode of the Student Founder Podcast, a platform and community that we're building around student entrepreneurship. We bring on expert student entrepreneurs, investors, people who are experts in business who have consulted with successful startups to talk about what it's like to run a successful startup. I'm your host, Oliver Kukanik, PhD student by day, student founder by night. And this episode is brought to you by Rofi Labs, a software development platform that I and a group of friends out of the University of Melbourne have helped to come curate, developing apps for startups, as well as dedicating resources for companies looking to expand their software development teams. If this is something you'd be interested in learning more about, please feel free to reach out at rofilabs.com.au or directly on LinkedIn at Oliver Kukanik, link in the description. Today's guest is a woman in tech, a mechatronic engineer who aims to push the boundaries of innovation in the robotics sector. Basically the Elon Musk of the female world. Hopefully she's okay with me saying that. She has 3 years of experience working in Australia's defence and space technology sector, after which she's now spun off a company called Andromeda, a passion project turned startup focused on developing humanoid robots who act as companions for individuals in aged care facilities. She's won various awards in the media, including being featured on Vogue for winning the Future Innovators Award. Introducing to you all, Grace Brown. Nice to meet you. Nice to talk.
Hi, what an intro.
Yeah, I know. We always got to make it really big and large, like make the person feel really special, you know. So, Grace, we had a bit of a discussion preliminary walking into this, but I think for the student entrepreneurs and the founders watching, maybe give us a bit of background as to who exactly you are and maybe why you chose to study engineering.
Yeah, no, so I'm a recent graduate from Melbourne University. I did the Bachelor of Science majoring in mechatronic systems. So I've worked, you know, I'm at the core of it, I'm a builder. You know, I love working on my own projects, building things, electronics, programming. I've predominantly most of my work experience has been in Australia's space sector. But there's a lot of sort of overlapping skills with that and robotics. And and most recently, I started my own robotics startup with my co-founder. We incorporated 3 months ago. And I guess right now we're just working full-time, grinding through the work of...
Just the proper student founder.
Yeah,
And
literally.
of course, technician, very hands-on.
Yeah.
So a lot of the, I guess, student founders or entrepreneurs that we bring on the show, they don't necessarily have those hands-on technical expertise like you would have if you were a mechatronics engineer. So maybe we can talk a little bit about maybe some of the smaller projects that you worked on just during your engineering degree, like, you know, how you came about, you know, driving yourself towards an interest in robotics and then actually coming to create a company out of that idea.
No. I think the first the first passion project that I was most engaged with in uni was actually my electric skateboard. So I moved from Brisbane to Melbourne. Yeah. And
a cold shift.
Yeah, it was a very cold shift, definitely. Still not used to it, still not accustomed. Yeah. But like just getting around the city was just like the city's so large and walking around it was quite tiring. Yeah. But it didn't make sense to have have a car. So so I learned how to skateboard. Well, I built my own electric skateboard because that seemed like the most feasible way to get around things. I didn't realize that you actually needed to know how to ride a skateboard. So I had no idea how to ride it.
So just fully engineered something. It's
So I built myself an electric skateboard and I had no idea how to use it. I thought you could just stand on it. The balance would just be easy because it's all self-controlled, but no, so I had to learn to ride the skateboard before I could properly use it. So that was the first really engaging project. In high school, though, I think the project that got me into engineering was actually building a hydraulic arm. So it was for a high school project. We had to like pick up a mass from one location and move it onto like a larger mass on another location, and I think it was the application of having to you had to do all the calculations on all the maths of like how much the arm could rotate and how many degrees of freedom it could have, and then before you went off and built it. And so that was what got me inspired to become an engineer, because that was an awesome project.
Sure. So I guess speaking on that point, so you had a passion for engineering as such, but specifically like working with robotics, right? And then wanting to like go into that, I guess to develop some type of product in that space. It's not only it's a highly competitive, I guess, area, right? Because I guess you need a lot of money to start a robotics company. I would have thought, at least, right? Maybe you can just touch on what kind of inspired you to get into starting your own robotics company, particularly.
That was that was in the first lockdown. I think. Well, I guess this wasn't what started. What got me inspired to build my own robotics company, but what got me inspired to build Abby was during the first lockdown, where I was feeling quite isolated, like many people were, and I also had just an abundant amount of time on my hands, and.
So what is Abby for the audience?
Oh, yes, sorry. I should probably
I wish you brought her.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all good.
She's literally just like down the road. Sorry. So Abby is the humanoid robot that I'm building. So she is designed to provide social and mental support for the disability and elderly care sector. But when I started building her, it was actually before the startup, and I actually was trying to build her for myself. Yeah. So I had watched a lot of science fiction films in the first lockdown, and a lot of them had humanoid robots, so I think subconsciously I was a little bit influenced in that way, and I thought, how great would it be if I could just have a friend for myself, which sounds really sad. Essentially, I was a really lonely engineer, and so I found a solution, which was to build myself a friend, and that's always been the mission for Abby. Is we're not trying to build like the world's best electromechanical system. We're not trying to build the world's best AI generative chatbot. What we're trying to really hone in and do is build the world's best robot friend.
Yeah, so, sure. Yeah. That's interesting. So I guess before you started Andromeda, the company itself, and started developing Abby, you were participating in, was it an internship in the space program, or was it?
So the Melbourne Space Program, so that's where I first pitched Abby. That's a student-led, not-for-profit organisation where they work on a whole variety of space and robotics projects. Yeah. So probably actually this would probably answer your question from before. I joined that program through their rover project. So I was a software engineer working on the autonomous stack for their autonomous Mars rover, and so I saw that organization was sophisticated enough and it had enough support from academics, mentors, industry experts, and enough engagement from students where you can pitch a project and actually have it, actually make something out of it, I suppose. And so that's why I decided to pitch Abby there, because I thought that would be where, if Abby was going to work out, that would be the place to build her.
Sure. So I want to get your perspective on something, because I guess what you're doing is quite creative by nature, right? Yeah. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about, kind of how you mentally went around developing a robot, because there's various sides of it. There's the actual hardware itself, and then the actual software itself, right? But before we get into that, I want to get your perspective on how important you think, not just for robotics companies and engineers, but for founders in general and entrepreneurs, how important creativity is in this industry.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I think, at the core of it, when I started my engineering degree, and I was looking for my first few internships, what I've noticed in Australia's sort of engineering sector was very industrial, very industrial and sort of repetitive automated processes, and all the applications for robotics were just, from my perspective, quite mundane, like very pick and place machines, robotic arms, and although the applications and the use cases have made a phenomenal impact on everything in society, I think I've always been more engaged with things that are like Disney and Pixar, and I emailed Pixar actually in my second year of uni saying, hey, like I'm a mechatronics engineer and I'd love to work for you guys.
You're like, I love Big Hero 6.
And like I didn't know what I'd do there, and actually the CEO got back to me.
Wow.
And he said, what did he say? He was like, we're a studio animation company, so we don't hire mechatronic engineers, which is very short-sighted thinking on the CEO's end, in my opinion. But yeah, so I always wanted something that, and like Disney, for example, they have what they call Imagineers, so which are just very creative engineers who work on like animatronics in their theme parks. And so that would have been like my dream job in first, second year uni. And so I've always wanted something that was, I guess I don't know how to put my finger on it exactly, but something that was that when you engage and interact with it, it would make you feel something. It would it would be able to elicit feelings from you, which like autonomous robotic arms that pick up apples or boxes don't really do that for you.
Yeah,
maybe.
sure.
I don't know.
No, I totally understand where you're coming from. That's a phenomenal story and very interesting. Like, because I guess it kind of talks a little bit as well to a point I wasn't going to touch on, but when you run your own startup or are thinking of these, incredibly creative ideas, you kind of have that shameless act of reaching out to people who you don't think will give you a chance, but they actually end up responding. So speaking to the CEO of Pixar, what I wanted to say was your kind of description on you talking and reaching out to someone like the CEO of Pixar and then them actually responding kind of talks a little bit to the fact that in this industry, in the startup world, sometimes you got to be a little bit shameless and reach out to people who you don't think will really give you an opportunity, but they actually end up giving you quite, an insight or perspective, or, when you're talking about education, you're asking questions for perspective, people will often, answer and be quite interested in, what you're working on as well as a founder. So, I want to talk a little bit about the traits of a successful entrepreneur and get your perspective on it coming from a more technical background. What do you think some of the more important traits are, or I guess, like archetypes of a student founder?
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. I don't know if I can speak to the traits of a successful CEO because I don't know if I fit that category.
Well, I mean, like just perspective in general. Like, what do you think it takes for a founder to kind of get off the ground?
Yeah, I think a lot of initiative. Definitely a lot of initiative to go out and start things and do things. I think. I think it's really well known, right? Like if you talk to nearly anyone in the world and ask them what they want to do in their life, like more than 90% of the people have this vision on how the world could be better, like on how they could help make the world better. But I'd say out of those 90+% of people, maybe only like 5% of people act on them. These are stats I'm making up. But
I get what you mean. It's completely unbalanced with how many people don't actually take action. Yeah,
so it's definitely like everyone wants to do something great. Everyone wants to make an impact. Everyone wants to, but I think there's not many people who actually go out and take that first step. And I can see how it can be quite hard, but
I mean, maybe you can talk on that. Like, before you, I guess had the courage and fortitude to go out and run your own company, like, did you have reluctancy? Was there a lot of pressure and fear of going into the darkness in that sense?
I think I had a lot of blind optimism. I still do. Yeah. I think I've always had this mentality where, I feel like nothing in the world can really go wrong. And I think that just comes from living a very sheltered life in all honesty. And so I think in 2016 when all the theme park like the Dreamworld in Queensland had like the accident and killed a few people, that shocked me to the core. I was like, what? Like engineers didn't like do their job properly? How is that? So I've always I've always sort of believed my whole life like that the world is this beautiful, great place, which my dad tells me it's not.
I mean, it's all about the optimism, right? So it's good that you got that mentality, and again, like you actually someone who's quite an inspiration because you're actually acting on those, you know, passions and those projects that you're thinking of and that creative like gauge, and then, you know, actually trying to make an impact in a certain area. So I guess we can move on to section 2, as I'll call it, right? Which is kind of like, you know, shit, man, like you're running a robotics company, you know what I mean? Which is phenomenal. It's something that I have no idea about, you know, where to even go about not only just starting it or validating that idea, but actually like somewhat successfully getting some traction and kind of getting off the ground, becoming, you know, a kind of a name around the area and the University of Melbourne and things like that. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your company, like Andromeda. So you spoke about it kind of being, you know, something you worked on. Was it during that internship, and then you kind of spun it off into its own company, right?
So I pitched it in Melbourne Space Program, so it wasn't an
Space
internship,
program,
but
not bad,
no, all good. And so it's, I think it was last year we actually, at the start she was just a simulation. Abby was just a simulation in Gazebo, and we, as a team of, at that point I think there was like 10 of us working on just like the control algorithms, the chatbot, the integration between computer vision and her navigational algorithms, and we were sort of desperately trying to just find funding. I think UniMel's engineering faculty weren't taking us seriously. They wouldn't fund us at the time.
So what do you think, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Because this is a very interesting topic, but at what point do you think, you know, you kind of got the idea to a point where people were like, oh shit, like this is actually pretty interesting. I'm going to put money into it potentially.
Yeah,
you know?
after we won the Vogue competition.
Okay.
So so that's, and that was actually what also planted the seed of the idea to make this a startup, because the Vogue Codes competition was a startup competition. But ironically at the time, we weren't a startup, nor were we thinking of becoming a startup. But ironically, we had won, which had given us a little bit of funding, and they wrote a column in their issue. And I think that's when people started really like turning and helping
there you
out.
go. Interesting. So, I mean, taking a step back then, in terms of actually coming up with your idea, developing it, how do you, I guess, how did you determine the need for this specific product?
Yeah, no, definitely. So in all honesty and transparency, like we definitely fall into the stereotypical startup of we had a solution looking for a problem.
Oh, okay.
Our passion definitely fell with the technology. I mean, like there's almost no doubt in our minds that there's going to be humanoid robots integrated in like every facet of society in the future. Like that wasn't even like, you know, and so, but I think we just didn't know how to introduce that to the world. We weren't starting with a really like granular problem that we were feeling. And that really like hinged our sort of investment process. Like we've been kicked back by a lot of, not kicked back, but investors have just gone away telling us all the
questioning,
time. Like we need to go and do market validation that there is demand for Abby in the market, that people will pay for Abby. And so we've spent since we've been incorporated, the priority has been really trying to figure out what is the quickest way we can demonstrate to people, to investors, that people will pay for Abby.
Interesting.
And even just navigating to figuring out that that's the question that we needed to answer took us like a month or two, really. So what was the question?
You've already spoken on the question. You've brought up other things that I kind of want to talk about, which is you know, you said, you know, you kind of developed a solution before you addressed the problem, but now you've obviously found a gap in some market for some problem, which is in aged care facilities. But you mentioned that the investors questioned and, you know, said that you need to spend more time validating the idea and trying to like, you know, get that market evaluation, whether or not people would pay for a product like this. I'm curious to know how you actually validate a robot. Like, you know, did you have to first develop it and then show people? Did you have to just run the idea by them? How do you go about that over
a chicken and an egg problem, really, because like to truly and truly validate the problem, you obviously want to have a working prototype that you can go out and test and have that feedback. But then in order to to build that prototype, you need investment to
you
build
need money,
it.
right?
And so it's a chicken and an egg problem. So what we're really doing, like we do have our first prototype fabricated. It's a full head to toe prototype, 3D printed, simple generative chatbot, computer vision, and it's a very, very simple prototype. But it's enough to just go out and give people a bit of an idea of what to expect. And what we're really trying to do is we're going to potential customers and really selling them the future.
Sure.
We're saying this is what we have today with a small university grant, but the future functionalities that you'll have are like XYZ. She can help out in these ways. And we're really just trying to sell that future to them and then get their feedback on how much would you pay for this, how much would you pay for this, and also getting their input on how actually should we develop her so that they can help relieve their pain points.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's an interesting point. In terms of naming a company like this, I want to talk a little bit about, Will, in a sec, just about, people's reaction to seeing the robot and actually getting a gauge on what the customers really wanted. But yeah, I want to get a gauge on exactly how you go about naming a company like this. So your company itself is called Andromeda, and then actually, naming the robot itself, Abby. What was the importance of that? And is there a story behind how you kind of facilitated that?
No, for sure. It's not a great story. It's so Andromeda is sort of the default name that I go to name a lot of things that I have that need names. So Andromeda is the name of like our nearest galaxy.
It's kind of moving towards us. Eventually we'll collide and we'll all be dead at the time. But
no, exactly.
The robots will be around.
So Andromeda, I learned, I came across that name first in a cosmology subject in first year, and I just really liked it. So I first named my Spotify playlist Andromeda, then I named my skateboard Andromeda, then anything that needs a name that's not my name, Grace, I just name Andromeda. So when I started my own company and we needed a name, I was like, I guess Andromeda then. Everything's Andromeda.
It makes sense, I guess it's kind of hits like nicely to the story of like your background and everything like that as well. So I have a curious question, which is, you were talking a little bit about how you kind of developed, your first prototype of Abby itself, right? What is the intention of what Abby will eventually look like? Right? Because you spoke a little bit about your like passion behind like, Pixar and reaching out to that sea of Pixar and everything like that. And I read somewhere that you kind of were inspired a bit by, Big Hero 6 and that big cuddly robot that's kind of fat and looks like a marshmallow, right? Is that your intention? Do you want it to be like a bit more like...
We're actually currently working with a 3D artist who's coming up with a few concept designs for a future, for our commercial product. So in a few weeks, I could probably show you a few sketches.
Yeah, definitely.
But she's... So I think we definitely don't want... We want her to look robotic, so we want it to look like a robot, and then people ask what does a robot really look like. But what we mean by that is we don't want to cross that uncanny valley curve. So we don't want her to look
you don't want to fear people, right?
We don't want her to look creepy at all. The idea is that she's meant to be approachable, friendly, but in terms of, she'll be about 1.20 meters, like right now she's 1.20 meters in height, so she's literally the size of like a 5-year-old child. The commercial product will also be around that size. We're thinking of using like silicon for the exterior, but I guess that's what we're all going to figure out in the R&D phase.
Definitely. Okay, so I want to touch a little bit on the sophistication of running a robotics company. Like I said before, there's kind of the idea that your company is very different to others that we've had on the podcast, because you have to develop the hardware, meaning the robot itself, and the software that kind of like, complements that model. So maybe you can touch on, what it's like from a technical standpoint, you as a founder, working with, spending hours engineering and actually manufacturing and 3D printing and getting all these graphics designers in to develop the actual hardware and the robot itself. And then, how you're kind of going about, ideating around some of the, the more technical things of, how you're going to maybe use AI or some type of software to adapt to different personality types that the robot may be interacting with in the future. Bit of a big question, but
so is the question...
I'll summarize it. So essentially, essentially, how do you go about, like, what's your everyday life like working with the hardware versus the software side of the company?
Well, hardware and software. So I'm definitely more a hardware engineer than a software engineer. Taz and I both are. Taz is my co-founder. So we, like, the whole reason we wanted to do this was because we were in love with the technology. We're both builders. We both love getting our hands dirty in the workshop. But we've actually found since building the company, it's not so much divided between hardware and software because they're sort of like two sides of the same coin.
Sure.
It's more so divided by like technical and non-technical. So that's actually been the harder balance that we've found because I think especially since we're trying to raise our first investment round, they want us, a lot of investors, they have this implicit belief that you can build anything that you want to build. Or that if they chuck enough money at you and given enough time, then anything you pitch will come to fruition. That sort of technical due diligence isn't there in the early stages of investment, which is good, but also not good because then you have to do all of this sort of customer validation and market demand validation. So you have to go out and prove. They think the harder thing to prove is that there is demand in market for the product that you're trying to build. And that's what we've really got to focus on at the start before our first investment, which has taken up most of our time compared to the actual building, which in a way I was a little bit saddened about at the start.
I mean, you're the technician, right? So you kind of want to be hands-on rather than more.
So it's definitely it was definitely a hard thing to sort of consider and do and take on, but the way we see it is right now, like we're trying to gather the fuel that we need, and the fuel being the investment, and once we have that, then we can go hardcore for 18 months to 2 years of mostly technical development, but closer to the end of that we'll need to go sort of raise funds again, like Series A, Series B, and so on. So this is just sort of part of the process of building a company, and and I'm learning to love all of it.
Of course. How did you get initial funding for this project?
So before we were incorporated, it was we got just like small support grants from the university that got us our actuators, our sensors, and so we could put together a bit of a prototype. But then we also got into StartMate, so we're currently going through the StartMate cohort.
So an accelerator program, essentially.
It's Australia's top startup accelerator, and so that comes with 120K investment at a 1.5 mil post-money valuation.
Wow.
And so that's brought Taz and I on board full-time to really just hit the goals that we need to achieve before getting our first investment, which we hope is going to come through soon.
So what's the plan for that? So you got some initial funding to develop, your prototype and I guess trying to like market the idea as well. But where do you think the next, I guess, round of funding will come from? And how are you going to prove to the investors that this is the product to invest in?
Well, we're quite deep in those conversations at the moment. So like best case scenario, I'm expecting like within the next two conversations to hopefully get a term sheet. We're currently going through the due diligence with one investment fund, but we have quite a few ongoing conversations in parallel with different VCs at the moment. And sort of going back to the things I've iterated on, the main thing they want to see right now is that market validation. And so we're just really trying to make sure that through our LOIs, and letters of intent to purchase, and surveys and feedback, that's enough to really demonstrate that demand.
How do you set up an LOI? Like, how do you go about, I guess, trying to, I mean, like you said, you found a problem after the solution, but then reaching out to those potential clients and then, I guess, convincing them that they would potentially buy it, and then signing something like a letter of intent. What's that been like for you?
At the start, when we started Andromeda, we were way too scared to ask for letters of intent. We just didn't feel like we had a product that was sophisticated enough. We didn't think, we just didn't feel ready. But through StartMate, we actually had a sales training session that was so pivotal because it just sort of changed our mindset. And that's what it really got us to realize that, one, like, we're not selling what we have today, we're selling the future. And also, two, letters of intent are non-binding. That was something I guess we didn't really... Well, of course they're non-binding, but it didn't really click with us. But when those two things clicked with us, it seemed a lot more possible. So we've started those conversations with potential customers this week on, would you be all right providing this sort of letter of intent for us so that we can bring that to investors to show the market demand. And at the end of the day, it does almost just feel like asking for a favor. because it doesn't take. There's no. They're not signing like it's a legal document, but it's non-binding.
Exactly.
But it's so powerful.
Still has value, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think letter of intent is a good way to validate a product. It's kind of almost like a questionnaire almost, right? Like there's always that feedback that comes in. If you have someone who's interested enough to sign a letter of intent, meaning that they might want to purchase the product, then that's obviously you're showing that you have a target audience, a target market that can pay for the product. I want to ask a more personal question before we switch gears, but who's your inspiration?
Oh, who's my inspiration?
So if you had someone you looked up to and you were like a quintessential example of who I want to be, or someone who I'm kind of working towards being. Do you have a mentor or someone that you look up to like that?
No, I definitely have. So it would probably be. And he's gonna feel pretty chuffed when I say it. It's one of my mentors. His name's Adam. He's a robotics. He's a roboticist. He calls himself a mad scientist, and he really is a real life mad scientist. He builds robot spiders.
I've met the guy.
Oh, have you met him?
Met the guy.
Oh my god!
I actually approached him because he had the robot set up near Abby at the accelerator program, right? I went up to him what's your deal? What's your story? And he's like, I'm a technician. He's I'm fascinated with development of robots, and I'm like, I can tell, you brilliant mind, But that's interesting because he's very creative.
So he would be my inspiration. He is in every way, not just technically, but also not just from a technical engineering perspective, but also from a more personal perspective. His mentality towards his projects and his passion, and it's what's the word where it influences you?
Influential. I don't know.
Influential. So I think I think first everyone has this, especially engineering students who meet him are just blown away by his technical prowess. Really.
I mean he has a very interesting story because I think when I spoke to him, he told me that he doesn't actually have a formal tertiary education in engineering, right? He has the diploma and things, but a lot of it's self-taught, which is very inspiring.
No, definitely. So he's working as a solutions architect at Amazon, but all of his technical skills have been self-taught, and it just shows that there's just so much more that goes on than what goes on in the classroom. I definitely don't regret studying. I love everything that I've learned from UniMel has taught me the foundations in calculus and physics that ultimately helped me with programming and building Abby. But the skills that you need, the software and the tools, the uni is not up to date with that at all. I think for example, Abby's chatbot is built on a GPT-3 language framework, which that now can, so it's predictive text, and I actually used that in one of my programming exams in lockdown, where you just have to write the title of the function and then it fills out. It predicts what the function is going to be. So in a way, that's almost considered cheating, because it's sort of you didn't really write. Is it did you cheat if you only wrote 10% of the paper yourself? Your code. But unis don't. They're just not up to date. There's just too much of a lag, and they don't teach you the things that especially with tech and robotics and AI, the things that have come out in the last 2 years alone, they can't build a course around it because it's just come out like that.
It's very dynamic. It's changing.
Exactly.
The changeability is you teach one cohort one thing, but then everything changes the next year. And it's very expensive to teach.
Exactly. So definitely in this space, you've got to be doing the things in that space to be up to date with it.
There you go. All right, so I guess we'll switch gears now and talk about something which is personally one of my more favorite parts of this segment, which is overcoming the challenges as a founder, right? So I'm sure you have a lot to talk about with this idea, because you yourself, I guess, have come from a very interesting background, kind of going into a field that's very, I guess, different to the canonical student founder. But maybe we can start with, what you think some of the more unique challenges are that you may have faced as a student founder or an entrepreneur, particularly in this space of robotics.
I think I've harped on this quite a bit. I think as a technical founder, I think there's a stereotype, which I know I fit, but the stereotype of you being way too obsessed with the product rather than the problem. And the reason for that is, because the problem's always going to stay the same, but the best solution might not. But the solution that you're building might not be the best solution. But I feel like as a founder, right, you're always going to want to lean into your expertise, right? Because a lot of people have suggested that we actually build digital AI companions because it's software, it's scalable, it's cheaper, faster. But, we're not passionate about AI companions. Like that's definitely going to be a huge space in the future. But we're really passionate about the hardware and the robotics side of things. And so we're of course going to want to try and use our expertise to solve a problem. So I think that's been challenging because people do box you into that stereotype, which I know I do fit, but there's, I think...
Well, I mean, you're like a leading success of kind of that idea where that you may fit into that demographic of people who have kind of, come up with the solution before the problem, but you're seeing traction, you're seeing success in what you're doing. Yeah. So it's still possible. It's just not the most standardized way of approaching a startup in itself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you touched on something before, which was design and development of Abby and the robot. And you with the design development, you didn't want to trace into that realm of uncanny valley, right? Yeah. Like people have this inherent fear of the future of AI, robotics, and what it could become. And there's movies and in Hollywood that kind of like talk and refer to that challenge. So, what do you think? Like, do you think that you've experienced any of that challenge with the development of the hardware itself in terms of not wanting to make it like a fearful looking robot?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like when we started, right, Taz wanted to build the Terminator.
Yeah.
And I was, no, but I think like Abby to me, like when I was doing my engineering degree, and I was signing up to different student projects, I've noticed all the projects you had like Melbourne Uni Racing, you had the rocketry team, you had all these different like teams that were very heavily male dominated, but also like the projects themselves were very like masculine. Like one project I worked on was named after the god of war, you know? And like I was just thinking like this isn't like attractive to a lot of girls, especially more feminine girls.
Absolutely.
And so when I started Abby as a student project, I was very intentional and very adamant at keeping her as a female, colorful, friendly sort of things that like stereotypically attract more girls than guys. But I just think I was building a project that I felt like I would have wanted to join in first year or would have liked to see. So
that's really good. That's really good. You kind of like had the focus and then built it around what you liked and were aspired towards. More of a personal, I guess, note then in terms of challenges. I guess engineering in general is quite a male-dominated industry, and you yourself are a female in tech, kind of pushing the boundaries of what, I guess the canonical sense of a CEO and being a female going into that CEO role. Have you experienced any challenges, kind of trying to push into this side of the field because you're a female?
Well, so I guess there's a little bit of like intersectionality here where, like engineering itself, that's like very, very low in male to female ratios. And then I've noticed that's the same sort of balance in startups. So it was very interesting that I found that seemed to be the same across too. I think it was either like 2020 or 2021, only 3% of funded startups were founded by females, something like disastrously low.
Very low.
And so from the startup perspective, I'm sure there's probably been a few things that maybe have come up implicitly that I'm not aware of perhaps. Like there's been nothing explicit that I've been like, if I was a male, like this wouldn't have happened, or I would have gotten this. But definitely in engineering, like I think through my internships and through just, even just coursework, like there's a lot that you experience that sort of that also no one else experiences, like especially the guys. Like you go through the same degree, taking the same subjects, guys and girls, but you have a completely different experience coming out of it. And also like psychologically as well, you're motivated by different things. And like job ads, for example, when I was recruiting students to work on Abby, I noticed the first recruitment round we had over 200 applications, but like less than 5 of them were from girls.
Wow.
And so it's like I know that there's more female engineering students out there, and so I was trying to look at what went wrong and how we could do better. And I went to like a person who does marketing, HR and marketing. and she pointed out that our job description was quite masculine, like had a lot of masculine terms. So things like fast-paced, competitive, everything that was like a lot more aggressive and actually deters girls from applying.
Sure.
So we changed that around and got a lot more female applicants in the next round.
That's good.
But even like just going into industry, I think every internship I had, I was the only female in every team I worked in, which isn't always the organization's fault.
I mean, like you said, a lot of the applicants are males.
Right? And but I think there's still like practices and things. I think that the stats of girls studying engineering is increasing, but the stats of girls staying in engineering, like that, like the girls are leaving engineering. There's nothing keeping them there after their degree. This is the whole system that the fields that girls go into, like the environment's just not designed for girls to really want to stay. At least that's from a lot of my experiences.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
So sorry.
I guess you have a pretty good team like set up, right? So you yourself like working with, what was your co-founder's name? Taz, yeah. How important is it to set up a good, like a well-established, well-rounded team for a project like this?
Yeah, no, I think we had a very, very close-knit team when we started, and I think we just had like our sort of breakup lunch where Taz and I are leaving the Melbourne Space Program team, and we got people to sort of speak about what was the best time they had in the team, like what they worked on or just something about it. And all of them had mentioned it was how well we worked together on Saturdays. Like Saturdays we had a work day. Wednesdays we also had work days, and I think we all formed this like really great bond with each other that just makes work infinitely more enjoyable. I think so right now Andromeda is just me and Taz at the moment. We will be looking to hire once we get our first investment round. But I think when I asked Taz to be my co-founder, I asked him because him and I work really, really well together, like on engineering projects. And like the two of us, from a technical perspective, we're a really dynamic team. And so I knew I wanted him to co-found this with me. He has an addictive personality to the things he does, just like I do. And so I knew that we would work well. But when we started, I realized I didn't know him all that well personally. So I asked him in the first early days of when we started Andromeda to grab lunch with me and grab a dinner with me, and we couldn't talk about work. It was a little bit awkward. It was very awkward. And then I was like, oh no, like we're not best friends. Like should co-founders be best friends? But
what's your perspective on that? Do you think that co-founders should be best friends?
I think like pop culture has really made you believe that should be the case. But what I think Taz and I have genuinely gone about it the right way, finding someone you work really, really well with, and then that friendship will form. Like that's what Taz and I, we've formed a really great friendship from working full time together. And so now we can go out to dinner and talk shit all the time.
Which is good. Good culture.
I think someone, as long as they have like the same values, but then also the technical work that you do together. I think those are the two main things.
So do you work weekends?
Yes. I don't promote it, but yes.
You do, right? So I guess as the team grows in Andromeda, what do you think some of the more important facets are as a founder to keep the team engaged?
Well, one thing I really want to implement that's becoming a lot more like socially acceptable is the 4-day work week. I found that, and that's just drawing from my own personal experiences when I was working in different jobs. The Friday, like I just never did shit on Friday. Fridays was just a bit of, I probably maybe did an hour of maximum 2 hours of productive work, and so if I'm like that, I'm sure other people are like that as well. So I do want to try and enforce the 4-day work week with new employees.
I think it definitely has value. Because people get burnt out, 5 days in a row. Especially if it's a high intensity job like engineering, where you're constantly like on your toes and feet trying to like overcome issues. So that's really, I guess, good perspective. In terms of sacrifices you've had to make to get this idea off the ground, what do you think some of those, like, have you made any inherent sacrifices in being a student founder?
Yes, I think so. I don't know if some people will call this a sacrifice, some people will call this a blessing in disguise, some people think it's an obvious blessing, but I deferred my studies, obviously. I haven't actually told my parents. I don't know when this is coming out, but just let me know.
Sorry, mum and dad.
Yeah. So I had like my whole study plan laid out, right? Like I was going to go on and do my master's in mechatronics. I still had 2 years, and I obviously deferred that. That was a bit of a hard decision because I really enjoyed studying. I enjoyed being a student. I had my identity tied into being a student.
Yeah.
And so that was, at the start, I felt like that was like a compromise I had to make of, okay, well, I want to do this now. Like, I don't want to do this in 2 years. I have the motivation to do it now. We've got like...
And the opportunity, right? It's an opportunistic thing. It doesn't come up all the time. So
yeah, exactly.
How hard was that to let go of the traditional degree and then...
Yeah, I think it was hard when I was thinking about it. But as like every week, I'm like... things happen that reinforces that was the right decision every single week. Like, I'm not crying in front of papers or.
Well, I mean, it's such a smart move because personally, I think the hands-on work is of far more value than the traditional, education that we get at universities. And that's not to say that there's not a lot of value in a university degree.
Yeah.
It's just that maybe a lot of people aren't using the university degree to its fullest potential.
No,
but if you go into the dark and run your own startup and you have to manage people, you have to manage time, projects. There's like so much extra value in what you're learning that you just really can't get engaged in university.
Definitely. I think the main value proposition from uni is really like, first of all, teaching you the foundations that you need to go on to learn harder and more abstract concepts, but then also like giving you the time and breadth to sort of explore your interests, because lots of students don't know what they want to do when they get their first job, and I think that's where university is really, really good at showing them what they're good at, showing them things that maybe they're good at but they don't like, and just trying things out. But I think because I already knew I wanted to do this as a startup, because I knew what I wanted to learn, I knew by about second year uni that I wanted to be like a world-class robotics developer eventually. I didn't really need to continue the degree to help me figure that out, although I would be like probably a lot more academically advanced if I had continued with my degree, knowing a lot more in-depth details about like transistors, capacitors, or whichever. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel like I've definitely made the right choice. I'm having a lot of fun.
That's good. That's far more important, right? It's like you're doing something that's very engaging, very difficult, inspiring to certain people, and it's like, you would have had fun being a student as well, but if you're having fun doing this and it's paying the bills and it's kind of like getting you one step closer towards where you want to be in life and your inspiration, then I don't see the issue in it at all.
Definitely.
So I guess I'll ask a question and then we'll almost pretty much wrap it up, but for Andromeda and the release of Abby on a commercial level, what is the, I guess, blue skies like idea? Like, I guess if it all goes well, what do you see the company being?
Well, if it all goes well, when it all goes well.
Let's make it happen.
I definitely see us being like one of the major players in the sort of social robotics market. Definitely in Australia, there's very, very few players in Australia, but even on a global scale, which when I was studying, I didn't even think that this would be possible, but through StartMate and through the people that I'm talking to, like I'm being connected to AI researchers from like Google Mind or Deep Speech, and like actually we're speaking, and going back to, I should have mentioned this before, but going back to the aesthetics of Abby, we're actually speaking with animators from DreamWorks who designed the face of Shrek and Kung Fu Panda to get their input on how we should design Abby. And so, we're speaking to all these like really like world-class experts. So I think, sorry, I've sort of digressed on just like...
No, that's fine. I love it. Just keep talking.
So going back to the blue sky vision though, I think being one of the main companies in the social robotics marketplace, and having Abby like sort of distributed like in so many different facets in society, like in schools and hospitals and in homes, but ultimately I think like what I'm really most excited about is really just having a prototype that I can keep in my home with me, who I can just have a very casual conversation with over dinner and genuinely feel like I can engage with this system, even though I know it's just hardware and electronics, but in a way where I can engage in it and it does make me feel like I've just had a chat with a friend. It sounds very small, but I think if we could do something that, if could build something that could do that, I would have really, really high levels of impact on society.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And one last question that I love to ask all my interviewees on this, podcast that we're trying to create is, before we leave, maybe you can look at the camera, give one piece of advice to maybe the founders out there who are watching this episode of The Student Founder.
I'd say the main bit of advice, and this goes back to like giving advice to myself really, is like confidence. I know it's very like overstated, I guess, but I had a lot of I had a lot of self-doubt in what I can and can't do. I sort of put myself in a box and limited myself. But I think most of the times, if you have something like that, that you're passionate about and that is really cool, and like maybe it won't be you who builds all of, like it's definitely not going to be me who builds all of Abby and bring her to market, but I'm able to build out the team and bring in the resources to do that. And so I think having the confidence to go out and know that it's not all on you, but also you can do way more than you think you are. Your potential is so much higher than you think it is.
There you go. Yeah. Inspirational.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll finish it off there. Thank you so much, Grace, for coming on to the podcast. We appreciate it. Yeah. We hope that all the viewers watching, from whatever background, have learned a lot from your experiences. You are quite an inspiration for people who are, looking to engage in something more difficult in their life, whether it be the foundership or, just anything in general, right? So I appreciate you coming on, and we'll wrap it up. So we really hope you liked that episode of the Student Founder podcast. If you like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on all socials. Links will be in the description. And I just want to reiterate that this episode was brought to you by Rofi Labs, a software development company that I and a group of friends out of University of Melbourne help establish. We basically help, companies, startups bring their MVPs to life and also expand development teams using dedicated resources. If this is something you'd be interested in learning more about, please reach out to me at Oliver Q. Canik on LinkedIn or on our website at rofilabs.com.au. Until next time, thank you so much for viewing this episode of the Student Founder podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.